Hey everyone, Walter Crosby with Helix Sales Development, your host of Sales and Cigars. Today's episode is a continuation of our series with Nate Tutas and how to think about sales. And Nate's going to introduce our a framework that he uses. It's the 4 R's of decision making. And it relates to business owners, it relates to sales leaders, sales managers, and salespeople. And it's something that I think we all do. He's put it into a framework, and he adds the last piece is what we usually screw up and what we usually forget, whether we're a business owner or a salesperson. And it's the piece that's the missing piece. So if we're using a framework like this, it's going to help us understand how to make a decision about hiring somebody, about training, for sales training, for any kind of training, for buying a piece of equipment, selecting a vendor. It's all packed into this 4 R's. So we kind of cover that from the perspective of how to think about sales and sales training. So there's one other piece to this. There's a little something different about this episode. And if you notice it, and you put a note in the comments, first person to give me a comment will get a gift, either a couple of cigars for Helix Cigars or a couple of Helix coffee. So pay attention. If you notice something, ping me in LinkedIn. So go grab a cigar, grab a cocktail, strap in for another interesting episode of Sales and Cigars. Thanks. Nate, welcome back to Sales and Cigars.
Thanks for having me. Always happy to be here.
It's been a minute since it's been a while, right? It's like almost a month.
Yep.
So this is our series about how to think about sales. And the topic for today, we've spent about 30 minutes talking about the topic in the green room. But I think this will be really helpful if you own a business, if you're a sales leader, or if you're a salesperson. This concept, this framework that Nate's going to share is going to help an entrepreneur share with his sales team how to think about business, how to think about their vision, how to think about the value of their time, how to think about what they're going to do to understand their customers. It's like it's two sides of a coin, because it'll help them think about sales in a more effective manner, and it'll help them think about who they're doing business with and why they should or shouldn't do business with that particular customer. Did I set that up right, Nate?
I believe you did. Absolutely.
No pressure. So why don't you talk about, it's basically a framework for making a decision as it relates to just about anything. I'd like to stay away from using this to talk about dating, marriage, like all of that. I think there's too many freaking variables there. Business is complicated enough. We don't need to add in the other component. And I'll stop talking so I don't get myself into trouble.
So essentially what we're talking about is a decision framework that I've used for quite a while now, but I actually just started articulating it not too long ago, and it basically consists of 4 R's. And so and it's its own definition. For some of you out there listening, you may know these R's from financial world, from the business world itself, but
from
some of them have
conversations that we've had.
Yep, from previous conversations.
I think you've used 2 of the R's, well, 3 of the R's in previous conversations.
Yep. So the 4 R's, just to kind of give it to everybody, and then we'll walk through how the framework actually works. The first R is return on investment, so ROI, which we're all fairly familiar with. Based on the initial investment that we're putting in, what is it that we're going to get out on the back end from a return perspective? So that's the first R that we consider in the decision-making framework. Is it actually worth the investment based on the return that we're going to get? From there, we move to the second R, which is your return, your rate of return, right? So if our return on investment is going to be $1 million, are we going to recoup that $1 million? Is our rate of return going to be 12 months or is it going to be 12 weeks? Because that obviously plays a big factor in, how great that's going to be. There's a huge percentage of people that don't get into the stock market and don't do investing because when they think of their ROI, they're more focused on the ROR, which is rate of return, and they don't have the patience for the compounding interest, et cetera, right?
They don't have the patience for the ups and downs when we're looking at the stock market, which also comes into play with sales.
Yep. So you've got your first two R's, ROI, return on investment, and then you've got ROR, rate of return. And then you've got the third R, which is ROE, which is return on effort. So how much effort do you actually have to put in order to get that particular return on investment and that particular rate of return? Because if you diminish the level of effort, you may either diminish your ROI or you may lengthen your rate of return. So all those things come into play. And then your last R is the one that I think a lot of people neglect when they're making decisions, which is ROT. It's return on time. And I personally define return on time as the rate of return over what time horizon. Because and the time horizon is typically different. It can be the same, but it's typically different than your rate of return. Because your rate of return might be that you're going to recoup your $1 million investment or whatever it is in 6 months. But the level of effort actually needs to be sustained for 18 to 24 months in order for it to be effective. Otherwise, if you just let your effort drop after the first 6 months, you may have recouped your investment, but everything's going to fall apart once that level of effort diminishes. So
we didn't really talk about this, but let's use sales training as the vehicle to talk about this, right? Because everybody in the audience has gone through, so hopefully everybody's gone through some form of sales training.
Yep.
And I think it really speaks to the reasons why I think sales training should be done later, not the first things that we do, for the reasons that you'll describe and it'll come to light. So, all right, so everybody's got that. We got the 4 R's, and we're gonna go through these one at a time. And I think what we'll do is, this is a series of conversations that we're having with Nate. So we'll go through this conversation at a high level, and then what we'll do is we'll come back and look at these in another perspective, from another lens, right? We're kind of looking at it as a business decision for an entrepreneur, for the business owner, and then we can kind of come back the next time and look at it and flip it from exactly in the salesperson's perspective, and we'll kind of go back and forth today. Is that fair?
Yep.
Right.
Absolutely.
So like I said before, you're going to do most of the talking.
Well, so let's think of, and you'll have more experience in this particular field. Let's think about it as an actual exercise of determining does an entrepreneur want to invest in sales training, and what are the various different factors when we consider the 4 R's in that decision-making framework for them to consider. So what would an initial investment be from a sales training perspective, Walter?
How big is the sales team?
We'll pick a random sampling size of like 10 salespeople.
So if we're just talking about training the salespeople, right? I'm going to assume with 10, there's 1 sales manager.
Yep.
And 10 salespeople. So you're probably looking at somewhere between $50,000 to $75,000 for a training program to whatever it is for that number of people.
Mm-hmm. So assuming that we've got a good ROI, what are we typically looking at as a typical ROI on something like that?
On the $75,000 or $50,000?
Yep.
In terms of their revenue, that would be the stick we would use to measure.
Mm-hmm.
I would think that we should be able to get them a 40% bump in revenue. with good sales training if we
Okay.
fixed all the other stuff wrong?
Yep. So if you fix all the other stuff wrong, invest 50K, and I can get a 40% bump in revenue. And
That's if everybody does an okay job, right? If everybody buys in and you got the right people on the team, and
yep.
it's all working well, your return there could be significant, 120, 150%, but that's a variable.
Right. And so that kind of jumps to the third R, which is return on effort. So how much effort do we actually need to put in order to get that return,
So let's
right?
look
So
at it as like an average group of people where we couldn't get them to fire the people that suck, right? And you've got, out of the 10, you got 2 people that shouldn't be on the team. You got 4 people that they're okay. They're doing all right. They could grow. And then you got 2 people that are like, just give me everything I need to go get better.
Yep.
Is that
So you have a 40% return on investment. So what rate of return would someone typically be looking at for something like that? Team of 10, they invest today.
18 months to 24 months.
So in 18 to 24 months, they're going to see a 40% bump in revenue.
You're not going to make me do math, are you?
No.
Good.
No, we're just using arbitrary numbers here.
So, okay. So we got an ROI.
Yep. So you got an ROI of about a 40% bump in revenue, and then you've got the ROR. It's going to take 18 to 24 months for you to actually see that 40% bump in revenue, right? So you'll probably have recouped your $50,000 investment way sooner than that.
Yes.
Right. So there's a different metric that you can look at there, but then we look at what is that return on effort, the ROE. How much effort actually needs to be put into this from a leadership perspective, right? You mentioned potentially having to fire salespeople. If you have to fire people, you typically have to hire people, right? There could be some people in your team that you're going to have infighting and different things like that. So those are all different factors that need to be brought into the equation for that business owner to say, what's most important to me? Is it the ROI that I want to get? Is it, and maybe there's an intrinsic ROI as well, as far as how that company is seen in the marketplace with the change in sales training, with the change in the approach that they actually take. So there can be intrinsic.
The professionalism of the team.
Exactly. And so that may outweigh all the other things, but that's where that return on effort comes in, because a lot of times what I experienced is a customer would look at the metrics, they would look at the numbers, and really those first two, the return on investment and the rate of return, those are lagging indicators, right? But when you look at that return on effort, that return on effort is something that is absolutely has to be taken into consideration, because when you're going to purchase something as a business owner, when you're going to invest in something, you also have to figure out, okay, what level of effort do I need to put into this in order to get that particular return?
What level of commitment and desire have to be part of this?
Yep.
And not just from the business owner, from the sales leadership, the sales manager, and the sales people. HR might be involved, right, to do some more hiring.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, so the effort side of it goes across the whole team, right? And that's where a lot of times that either isn't taken into consideration or it's kind of washed over many times. Or it's assumed that effort will be there without it actually being discussed. That's actually what I find.
That one is really, really important when I have a conversation with a business owner before we start. That's one of the things that we look at. It's like, are you prepared to do what is necessary? And then you kind of walk them through that. I haven't used this framework, right? It's just been something that I've done bits and pieces of it along the way. But that part I have, like, let's really look at what you're going to have to do. This guy's going to have to really be focused. Somebody's going to have to hold these people accountable, and you're going to have to hold that person accountable, right? And this is going to look right. So that's what we're talking about here, from
Yep.
a actual day to day in the life.
Yep. Yeah, because then the last R, the return on time, is looking back at that level of effort over what time horizon that it actually needs to be considered. So that's another thing that a lot of times people don't necessarily take into consideration, or there's an assumption made that, oh yeah, they'll put in that level of effort. But as a lot of our phrases go, when the going gets rough, now I'm blanking on the actual phrase. The tough get
Going. You're trying to think of something smart to say about a Marine at that point, right?
So, but that's a lot of times the other element that gets taken out. I dealt with this a lot, having come from selling software. A lot of times the software gets put in place, and people think about the ROI that they're going to get from implementing the software. They think about the rate of return, how quickly they're going to recoup that ROI. A lot of times the return on effort is neglected, and many times the return on effort over the extended time horizon, that return on time, is really neglected. And that's where a lot of times those softwares end up falling short. And it's not necessarily from the software company's perspective, because they've done their initial job, their initial rollout many times. But that, it's like when you get an iPhone. How many of us actually use the full iPhone, Samsung, whatever? How many of us actually use the phone to the full extent that it's actually capable of? We get far enough with the initial effort to learn where the new buttons are and new apps and whatever, and then we're good.
You can get closer to home and talk about how much of our brain do we actually use, right? It's less than 15% of its capacity is what we
Yep.
actually use. So, the idea of purchasing software, the idea of doing sales training, I've always spoken about sales training is that it doesn't make sense to do it if we don't have the right people in place, if we don't have the right infrastructure in place to make sure that it's actually going to be supported, coached, right, and it be part of the new sales organization's culture.
Yep.
So, and your framework is putting this together and the goal of this is to analyze what we're about to enter into, whatever that is, to make sure it's really going to be effective, and we're going to get that return. So,
and is it something that you want to do? Because that's the other thing. The ROI could be there, the rate of return could be reasonable to the point that you're happy with it. The return on effort could be there, where you're willing to put in that level of effort. But when you look at that fourth element, that return on time, the level of effort over what time horizon, that's typically where those things end up falling short. And you and I have heard many stories of, oh, I invested in this or I invested in that, and it didn't get me the result I was hoping for, because at some point, when it was on us to take responsibility and take ownership to implement it and keep things moving, we gave up on it for whatever reason. And that's where that consideration has to come into place. And that's where I've used that as a decision-making framework on various different things, where I've gotten through it and said, okay, this is worth it, but am I willing to put in that continued amount of effort? Am I willing to put in that continued drive to get better at it, to figure out how to really utilize it, to figure out how to really leverage it, all those kinds of things? And that's where I feel like a lot of people fall short from the decision process.
oh, it's falling short because it's not even considered, right? It's just something that we don't. I mean, I said we wouldn't talk about it, but getting married, right? It's. I saw an old couple, a video yesterday of an old couple, been married 64 years. They were freaking old, right? And somebody made the comment that half of marriages end in divorce, and these folks were from Europe, someplace, and they're like, that happens in this country, because it's so easy to walk away.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're really talking about is that time factor is like, it's going to take some effort. Like if you're getting married, you're going to have some bumps. You're going to have some disagreements. You're going to have some minor ones and some major ones. But if we made this commitment to move forward with the software, the marriage, the training, whatever it is, then we gotta be willing to pay the freight to go for that whole ride. Otherwise, you've pissed away all of that time and money and resources, and then you just go do it again and think you've accomplished something. So let's. Is there anything else that we need to cover before we jump to the context?
No, I think that pretty much covers it.
So what we've talked about in the previous episode is a salesperson thinking about their job as not a job, but thinking about it as a little business within the bigger organization. And then they start to think about how they're going to spend their time, and is this worth my time? And I'm not talking about doing call reports. I'm talking about customers. Is this customer, and the simplest way I can explain it is, if it takes the same amount of time to write up a $5,000 order and to work it from start to finish as it does a $50,000 order, why would we want to do the $5,000 orders on a regular basis? It seems like that would be a really low ROI, a really low return on the time, really on the effort piece. It's the same effort. And sometimes those guys are a bigger pain in the ass than, and I'm guilty of this all the time. And for the same reasons that salespeople are guilty of it, is that he's a nice guy, they need the help, I know I can help them, and you don't really do the analysis, and you don't really have the real conversation. So can we talk about this framework in that sense as to how that business owner might be able to get their salespeople to think differently?
Yeah, if I was a business owner working with my sales team, this is a decision framework that I would take them through as it relates to their leads that they're working and the opportunities that are actually in their pipeline. What's the expected return on investment from your time and effort that you're putting into this particular opportunity? And when you weigh that up against the rate of return, like sometimes you could say, hey, like you put a caveat around there that it's the same amount of time, $50,000 order, $5,000 order. Easy decision, right? Sometimes we have it where it's the opposite, where that $50,000 order is going to take us 6 months from a sales cycle time, and the $5,000 order is going to take us 6 weeks, right? I would still argue the 6 months and the 6 weeks, I can get I can get $50,000 from one sale versus, however many that would take. So from 10 sales over a 6-week period of time. So that's one way to think about it, is just what is that return on investment, and then what is that rate of return for you to actually recoup that investment. And then when you start thinking about the level of effort that you have to put into it, right? Sometimes that $50,000 in return, that $50,000 customer, that order, is going to take a higher amount of effort than the $5,000 order. Are you willing to actually put in that amount of effort? Are you willing to go that extra distance to close that customer that's a $50,000 order? Or are you saying, no, I'm not willing to put in that amount of effort, so I'm going to go with the $5,000 order? But then when you consider the return on time, the amount of effort over what time horizon, in my experience, the customers that come in at a very low ticket value are typically, not always, but typically end up being the biggest problem customers that you have from an organization perspective. So what is the amount of effort over what time horizon for that customer in comparison to the $50,000 customer? And that many times is absorbing a ton of time for the salesperson, that they've got a bunch of these small customers that they're bringing on that are absorbing a ton of their time after the sale, post-sale, when they're not making anything more, and it's eroding the margins, it's eroding their effort, it's eroding all those kinds of things. So when you go through those four factors and you actually weigh them all out, it becomes a no-brainer that you would work on the $50,000 order and bring that in with the amount of effort that it would take over the time horizon.
So this is going to have, I mean, we could go down pricing models, we could go down sales competency, salesperson's competencies, whether you have somebody dealing with larger deals and somebody dealing with smaller deals, and you have almost a different infrastructure in place for those. But what I kind of want to keep this so that we're able to help people at a high level initially, is this could be simply the way to introduce this might be like, this is how we train our salespeople to think about their time. This is how we train them to think about their interactions with customers and why we're focused on who we're focused on, and why we're not focused on those people, right? Why these things are important. And it's probably, you know, if a business owner took an hour a week, right, to steal Chet Holmes's concept, if you spend an hour a week talking about this big picture and then start to work on each of the R's over a period of like 3 months, this concept would start to settle in to their brains and they would start to connect the dots. And then after that, you're really starting to dial in the nuances of each one of these R's. And within a year of 50 hours of investment in getting people to think differently, I think the ROI, like all of your R's on that time frame would be, it would solve that problem about getting them to think, but it would just change the dynamic, raise the bar on the level of professionalism, getting everybody to kind of be working together. And then if you brought the department heads in from marketing, like, we really want to focus on these guys, and and our customer support people, when you're starting to hear a lot of problems from these little accounts, you know, that information needs to feed back to this group, so we can help validate that the little 3-person license for software or the little 3-person training program is needs to be rethought. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I think it does. Because, and I mentioned this before, so I just want to make sure that I kind of loop it all together and tie it down. But the return on effort and the return on time, the amount of effort over the time horizon, that can really be defined as a subset of return on sacrifice, right? And so that's the amount of sacrifice you're willing to put into it. So if we take the example that you just gave of an hour a week, 50 weeks a year, and this is the return that you're going to get, right? Are you willing to sacrifice that hour of your time to work with your sales team, to work through this model, to work through this decision framework, so that in the end, they're intuitively thinking about how they spend their time more effectively? And this will probably be one of those other episodes that will go into a deeper route, but they're also then applying that to how their customers are thinking about investing in you and your company.
Yeah, that brings a whole different, allows us to be thinking about how we become a partner rather than a supplier or a vendor.
Yep.
So the word sacrifice, though, I think we need to put some context there, because we're sacrificing the time, but we're doing the end goal is the lift is there, right? Which speaks to the whole R framework, that we're investing in this concept, but we've evaluated what we're going to work on and what we're going to sacrifice. So sacrificing an hour a week doesn't doesn't seem like a lot. It seems like a lot after it's like a full week out of the year when you really think about it. But if you do a little bit at a time and it starts to really move the needle, the whole company can grow. Mm-hmm. It's about being consistent.
Right. And I think one of the reasons that the return on time needs to be part of that decision-making process and needs to be part of one of the reasons that I have it as part of that framework is because to say to someone, hey, an hour a week and this is what'll happen, many times a sales leader, an entrepreneur, what have you, will be like, yep, hour a week, cool. I can fit that into my schedule. But it's that over the time horizon perspective of an hour a week for the entire year. And oh, by the way, after that year is done, that's probably continuing in year 2 and year 3, or someone is moving into that spot. You're training someone to move into that spot and continue that process.
Somebody from that group could step into that role and facilitate those, right? And then
yep.
the leadership is getting it. The concept works for sales training. It actually helps change the culture of the organization. Mm-hmm. And the people that don't participate in that aren't sacrificing the time with the level of participation, all of that will bubble up to the top, and people will see that person's not pulling their weight. The mediocrity will be, a light will shine on that. So I'm trying to help business owners or any leader there to think about this concept as how it's going to help them, the whole ship, right? I'm struggling with the metaphor, but when the whole water rises, all the boats rise, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what we're doing, is raising the level, global warming, maybe, because we're but everybody's going to benefit from this. The whole company, the community, all of your suppliers. I mean, everybody's going to grow from this.
Yep.
So, and this is something that I think people think about in bits and pieces, but that's the advantage of a framework like this, is that it brings it all together, and then that, oh crap, we didn't really think about, we're going to have to do this for the next, seriously focus on this for the next year. And then we'll have to figure out, while we're doing that, how this becomes integrated into the organization, so it's not even a question anymore. It's integrated into the fabric.
Yep. Yeah, an analogy that I would apply to this is it's similar to dieting, right? So if you're in the health field, they'll say it's not a diet, it's a lifestyle change, right? And one of the reasons that phrase has become so popular is because I forget what the actual statistic is, but majority of people that go on a diet to lose weight eventually bounce back up to the same weight they started at, or even gain weight on top of that.
Yeah, they usually gain weight.
And one of the reasons is because they've considered the ROI, they've considered the ROR, they want to lose this much weight and look this good and blah, blah, blah by this date. So they've kind of figured out the time frame, and then they know the level of effort that they're going to have to put in. They're willing to sacrifice the food, they're willing to sacrifice the donuts, the cheesecake, the ice cream, what have you, for X amount of months. But what they neglect to tie into it all is that return on time, the amount of effort over the time horizon, because once you reach that point, if you want to maintain that, then that level of effort, that level of sacrifice has to stay there. You have to be willing to continue investing in your health, continue to invest in your diet, continue, all those kinds of things in order to actually maintain that. Otherwise, you go back to where you were. Same thing with a sales training type thing, right? You can put that investment in, you can put that effort in up to a certain point, but if you give up on that at some point, well, now things start to slide. It may not happen overnight, but things will start to slide eventually, and you go back to where you were, or maybe even worse.
So, and on top of that, with your diet, lifestyle change, it's routines and habits that have to change. Mm-hmm. The mindset is the first piece. Like, I have to do this because of some fear or some pleasure point that we're trying to get to. We got to go through that, develop the right habits and the right routines to be able to get us there. But most people want the magic pill.
Mm-hmm.
And with diet, there's no magic pill that you can take that makes up for the 14 donuts you had for breakfast and lunch and a snack in the afternoon. It just doesn't exist. But it is easier for people to think about taking medication as a way to solve the problem when you could solve the problem with the right amount of effort, the right amount of and sacrifice to get there. And just most people aren't willing to do that. So when you're looking at it from the business perspective, from investing in the training, investing in a piece of software, a piece of equipment, right, for your manufacturing process, it's the same thing. You just don't have to deal with the attitude of the equipment, right? The equipment's just going to go do its job. You just have to worry about its quality and its workmanship.
But you may still have a level of effort over an extended period of time for the life of that machine. What level of effort goes into its upkeep, its regular maintenance, all that kind of stuff.
Training the user to change how they do it. The change is what it comes to. So we're really managing, what we're really talking about here is changing how people think about what they're doing. And once they realize, I'm not going to lose the weight, I'm not going to change the outcomes of a revenue forecast, I'm not going to change our revenue, I'm not going to change our margins unless I'm willing to do the work. And that hasn't changed. That's still the case. We're just, with your framework here, we're putting a spotlight on that and helping them see that beforehand. So it's not necessarily a mathematical formula that we're looking at here. It's looking at it from the perspective of what is likely to happen, and what should we expect, and what's realistic, and can we do that? And most importantly, when somebody falls down in the process. So I had a salesperson today call me and say, hey, I need to cancel this week and reschedule for next week. And my response is, yeah, what did the boss say when you want to cancel this? He goes, well, I'm going to make it up. No, but we're supposed to talk today, right? What did they say? Like, what's the commitment level from the top, right? There's always reasons to change things. I get it. But if we start to let things slide at any point, I can have a half a bagel. If I don't put cream cheese on it, it won't be so bad. As soon as we let that thinking slip in, we're doomed. Doesn't matter if we're exercising or training or coaching. If we let a coaching conversation go by without doing it, we start to slip down that slope.
Yep. Yeah, and that's, one of the, this will probably be another conversation, but one of the reasons that I kind of, I want to say developed, but the reason I kind of solidified this framework was because when I'm in a sales position, I honestly see it that my number one objective as a salesperson is to help the person that I'm working with to come to the best decision possible for them, right? And the only way that
if they buy your stuff.
Correct. And so the only way that I could ensure that I was doing that was to make sure that they also fully understood those four factors, right? And that I could legitimately say, if you have to put in this much effort over this time horizon, is that something you're willing to do? Because if your answer to that is no, then I may have the greatest product in the world for you to purchase. But if you're not willing to put in the amount of effort and the amount of time and everything else that it takes to actually get the return, to get the things out of it that you're looking for, then I'm doing you a disservice by letting you go forward, right? Now, I may have to do some work on helping you to break through some limiting beliefs so that you do make that decision, you do go forward, and you do get to the point where you say, no, that level of effort is worth it. But it's my part of my job is to make sure that you understand what that is and that you're prepared to actually take those actions in order to go forward and do that.
Yeah, the sales training that I've had over my career, and the way that I've gone about things is just that. We're trying to help this prospect or this customer, and even though we know that this particular product that we're selling or service is going to solve that problem, and they haven't gotten to that decision, we got to help them see why it might be, right? That's the sales process. That's the questions that we ask. All of that. That's all technique and skills, competencies. But the thing that I think salespeople are quick to forget is that you got to help them, and that's really the last part. Is like, you realize how hard this is going to be. It's going to take some effort. So let's talk about that before you have the purchase order, before you've closed the deal, because that's when they have to make that commitment with both eyes, and salespeople are going to be very reticent to look for a reason why somebody might not do it. But that's actually how you close the deal and clinch it for success for the long term. And you get raving fans as customers and all the other cliches that are out there. And then somebody doesn't feel like they've been sold a bag of goods.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, because you were literally there helping them make a good decision, and you were on their side of the table working with them to make sure that they understood all the variables and that they were prepared for what was going to have to be invested on their part in order to get that ROI that they were looking for. Because again, the ROI is a lagging indicator. So if you don't put in the effort, right?
Didn't work. So
didn't work.
It's the sales guy's fault. He sold me some faulty stuff. When everybody, in reality, the customer probably knows that they didn't put the effort in, but they don't want to admit that. So they're not going to admit that. So I think the big takeaways here, right? I'm going to list a couple, and you fill in the blanks for me, so that if you're running a business and you're struggling with, some of your salespeople get it. Is this I'm talking about emotion here? You look at them, and some of them get it. They're having the right conversations with people, and they're having the right conversations with the right people. Then this will help. This framework will help the rest of the team to step up, because some of them might be doing one or two. Some of them will never do any of them. So this will help you see that it's the right decision to exit those people from the business. But if we help them start to think about this, everything else that they're going to try to do is going to be easier. So this might be a struggle from that sacrifice point of view, but if we think about it, if we're just sacrificing an hour a week to work on this one thing over the course of a year, you keep making this incremental progress. It's where you get the hockey stick growth, I think. I did an interview the other day with somebody where he talked about everybody wants hockey stick growth, right? It's going up. But everybody forgets about the handle on the stick, the shaft, right? It takes a little bit to get there.
Yeah.
And if you're using a framework like this, that handle can be shorter, and you start to go up quicker, and then it will just explode. And you've built the whole structure around it. What did I miss? Got the alignment? You got a way to approach this on a systematic habit routine format. You got the big picture that's going to help these guys think differently. What else is this going to help the business owner accomplish?
As far as what else, I think it can be applied in so many different ways. Specifically related to the salesperson, I think what's interesting is a lot of times things that we hear from I don't know if it's commonplace per se, but a lot of times you hear about business acumen and how business acumen is lacking for salespeople a lot of times. A lot of times it boils down to how they think. So they're not thinking in these frameworks. They're not thinking in these terms. They're not thinking about how these 4 R's actually apply to the businesses that they're selling to, right? And so if you have this where you're actually taking this and applying it to how you invest your time, right? Even if it's just reading a book, what's my return on investment on reading this book? What's my rate of return? How long is it going to take me to actually get through it, implement it, et cetera, et cetera? How much effort do I need to put in order to actually implement what I'm going to learn in the book? And then how long, over what time horizon do I actually need to put in that level of effort in order to get what I'm learning from the book? I mean, you can apply it in so many different ways, but that, I think, gives you a decision-making framework if you're an entrepreneur and you're making a decision around what books you're going to invest in, what learning you're going to take on, to even your team and how you're going to invest in your team. And are you willing to do that, yay or nay, and make your decision based off of those 4 different factors?
And it also helps you. I think the last thing that comes to mind with one of the things you said about reading books, some people are like, I got a goal, I'm going to read 52 books this year. Does that necessarily make sense? Wouldn't it make more sense to read 12 books and really get something out of it and really understand the principles of it? And sure, you might read one of those might be a crappy, not get something out of it, but let's focus our effort on things that are actually going to help us move the needle, and this will help us focus on those things and work on 3 things instead of 300 things, and do all of them crapple in a shitty way. So I think there's a lot of problems this can solve inside of an organization if we just start to train our people to think. And I think that's really the message. If we train our people to think like this, they get the business acumen, and everything else becomes easier. And then you can start to apply these principles more specifically with training and coaching and machinery to buy and people to hire, right? Agencies to hire. I think all that comes into play. And it's a good way to ask questions about your vendors.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So we got that in the time frame that we were shooting for. So
Yep.
I thank you. I think when we come back, we found a couple of things next month to dive a little bit deeper in. So I would challenge the audience to go out and start to think about ROI, ROR, ROE, and ROT. Start to think about that as to how they can implement it. And so if they got questions and they want to talk to the source, what's the best way to reach Uncle Nate?
The best way is just search for me on LinkedIn, and you can connect with me on LinkedIn, and just send me a direct message, and I'll be happy to connect and talk about it further.
So Nate Tutas, Tutas, and that's a simple, easy way to get started. All right, man. Thank you very much as always. I appreciate it.
Yep. Thank you.